She was 18 years old, and she was walking into a blizzard to die. The snow wasn't just falling, it was coming for her. Each flake was a tiny white razor, slicing at her cheeks, catching in her eyelashes until the whole world blurred into a smear of gray and white. Her boots, a gift from a life she no longer had, were torn open at the seams. Icy slush seeped in, turning her feet into blocks of dead stone. She pulled a thin shawl tighter, a useless gesture. The wind laughed and tore the warmth right out of her hands. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She tried again, forcing the words past the lump of ice in her throat. "Don't touch me," she whispered to the storm. "I'm broken." The forest listened. The great pines, heavy with snow, groaned under the weight. They bent, but they didn't break. Not like her. A hunger clawed at her stomach, but it was nothing compared to the shame. The shame was a physical thing, a heavy hand pressing her down, down, down into the snow. Her knees gave out. She sank into a drift, the cold rushing up to swallow her. This is it, she thought. A quiet end, a clean end. No one left to point, no one left to whisper. But then something moved in the trees. A figure stepped out of the swirling white. He was a giant, carved from the mountain itself. He wore no shirt, and the wind that cut her to the bone seemed to have no effect on him. His skin was bronze. His hair was long and white as the snow, and steam rose from his broad shoulders as if he were a furnace against the cold. His eyes found hers, and in them she saw no hunger, no cruelty, only a patience as old as the stones around them. She flinched, instinctively covering herself. Even the air felt like a violation. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't reach for her. He just stood there, waiting. "I can walk," she lied, her voice a pathetic rasp. Her legs, buried deep in the snow, trembled in protest. He crouched, the snow crunching under his weight, until his massive frame was level with her. His voice was low and deep, like water moving under ice. "I will not touch you, girl, but will you hear me?" She couldn't speak, so she just nodded, her eyes wide with a fear she couldn't name. "I am Chaza," he said. "My son is Tahu. He is strong, and he is alone. The spirit said his wife would come with the storm. I ask you, will you marry him?" The world stopped. The wind died. The snow hung suspended in the air. Of all the things she had expected, of all the horrors she had imagined, this was not one of them. Marriage? To the son of a shirtless giant who appeared in a blizzard? The absurdity of it was a slap in the face. A hysterical laugh bubbled in her chest, but it came out as a choked sob. I can't," she whispered, the shame rushing back, hot and suffocating. "Don't you see? I'm ruined. I'm broken. No man wants what I am." Chaza's dark eyes studied her. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He just inclined his head, a gesture of respect so profound it made her shame burn even hotter. "You think you are broken," he said, his breath pluming in the frigid air. "But broken things can still carry fire." He didn't know. He couldn't possibly know the truth of her ruin. "You don't know me," she spat, turning her face away as hot tears froze on her cheeks. "I know enough," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The snow would take you tonight. My son has need of a wife. You have need of a life. This is the trade." It was so simple, so transactional. No pity, no desire. Just a stark, impossible choice laid out before her in the snow. Her life for a life. She forced herself to stand, her legs screaming with the effort. Stubbornness was the only armor she had left. "I'll walk," she said again. Chaza rose with her, a mountain unfolding. He still didn't offer a hand. He just watched, his presence a silent wall at her side. They started moving, her steps a desperate stumble, his a steady, ground-eating stride. The snow got deeper, the world closing in. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her ankle twisted and she went down hard, bracing for his hands to grab her, to haul her up. But he did nothing. He let her struggle back to her feet on her own. He was testing her. She was about to collapse again when his voice cut through the wind. "My son waits in town. You will see him. Then you may choose." "I've already told you," she choked out. "I can't belong to anyone." "You belong to the earth," Chaza said, his tone flat and true. "The earth does not cast out its children." The words were a strange comfort, but they also terrified her. They reached past the walls she had built, stirring something she had tried to kill long ago. Hope. They walked on, an eternity of white. Her body finally gave up. She folded into the snow, her vision narrowing to a pinpoint of light. This was it. For real this time. "Girl!" Chaza's voice was right beside her, steady as a heartbeat. "If you close your eyes now, you will not open them again." A sob was her only answer. He crouched again, a patient shadow in the storm. He could have lifted her like a child, but he didn't. He waited. Her will or her death. That was the choice. Through the blur of her tears, she saw his ancient eyes, not pitying, not demanding, just waiting. And a tiny, forgotten ember in her chest flickered. It was small, but it was defiant. She pressed her frozen hands into the snow and pushed. She got to her knees, then to her feet, swaying like a sapling in the gale. Chaza gave the smallest of nods, an acknowledgement. She had passed the test. They kept walking, and then, through the trees, she saw it. A faint, blurry glow. Lantern light. Town. The knot in her stomach tightened. Town meant whispers. Town meant stares like daggers. Town meant facing the very thing she had walked into the blizzard to escape. As they reached the edge of the settlement, Chaza stopped. He looked at her, his head tilted. "You will see him," he repeated. "Then decide." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to turn, to flee back into the clean, anonymous white of the storm. But her feet were frozen to the spot, and through the swirling snow she saw him. Another giant. Younger, but just as broad, just as bare-chested against the impossible cold. He stood by the trading post, a silent sentinel. And his dark, unblinking eyes were not on his father. They were fixed, with an unnerving intensity, directly on her. The town was a huddle of dark shapes, cowering under a blanket of white. Lanterns sputtered, their light swallowed by the storm. As Isa walked in, with the silent giant Chaza at her side, every window suddenly seemed to have a face in it. Every doorway held a shadow. The whispers started before she even took her third step. They weren't just whispers. They were little stones being thrown at her. A girl, already soiled by shame, now walking with a shirtless Apache. It was a scandal. It was a spectacle. She could feel their eyes burning holes in her thin shawl. She wanted to shrink, to become invisible, but with Chaza beside her, she was more visible than she had ever been. And then she saw him again. Tahu, Chaza's son. He stood near the trading post, steam rising from his body, the snow melting on his shoulders. He was like a statue carved from dark stone and winter patience. His eyes locked on her, and she felt a jolt, a raw, terrifying feeling of being truly seen. "This is Tahu." Chaza's voice was a low rumble, almost lost in the wind. Issa glanced at the young man, then immediately looked down, a hot blush of shame crawling up her neck. She braced for the disgust, the sneer she knew so well. But when she dared to look up again, his expression hadn't changed. He just watched her, not judging, not wanting, just watching. The door of the trading post creaked open, spilling a rectangle of yellow light onto the snow. A man squinted out, his face pinched and mean. Elias Turner, his lips twisted into a smirk. "Martha!" he called over his shoulder. "You'll want to see this." A woman wrapped in expensive furs appeared beside him, Martha Kane. Her eyes were small and sharp, like a rat's. She let out a short, cruel bark of a laugh. "Well, if it isn't little Issa Monroe," she said, her voice loud enough for the whole town to hear. "Thought you'd finally done us all a favor and vanished with the last storm." Her gaze slid from Issa to Chaza, then to Tahu, cold and contemptuous. "And now you're keeping Apache company. Sweet Lord, save us." The words were like nettles against Issa's skin. She froze, her throat closing up. Chaza remained silent, his stillness a challenge. Tahu didn't even flinch. Martha wasn't done. "No wonder no decent man in town would have her," she crowed to the growing crowd of onlookers. "Broken girl, ruined before she was even ripe. Now she has to seek comfort with savages who don't know any better." Laughter rippled through the watchers. Issa bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. She wished the ground would open up and swallow her. The shame was a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. This was why she'd walked into the storm. To escape this. Chaza finally moved. He stepped past her, his shadow falling over the sneering couple in the doorway. He placed 2 coins on the counter inside. The sound was like a gavel falling. "Flour. Meat," he said simply. Elias Turner raised an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "For her, she's better fed by gossip, I'd say." He looked past Chaza, his eyes lingering on Issa with a possessive, knowing cruelty that made her stomach turn. It was a look she knew all too well. Chaza didn't reply. He just waited. There was something in his silence, something ancient and unmovable, that unnerved the shopkeeper. Grumbling, Elias shoved a sack of flour and a piece of dried meat across the counter. Chaza took them, but he didn't hand them to Issa. He placed them on the edge of the counter, just within her reach. He was offering her the chance to take it herself. A small, simple act of dignity. Her hand trembled as she reached for the sack. Behind her, she heard a quiet sound. Tahu had crouched down. He was working on something. She turned her head just enough to see. He was fixing her boot. He had torn a strip of leather from his own belt and was deftly stitching the broken seam of her boot. His face was a mask of concentration, as if nothing else in the world existed but this small, broken thing. He ignored the stares, the whispers, the whole hateful judgment of the town. When he was finished, he set the repaired boot on the snow in front of her. He said nothing. Her throat ached. She wanted to tell him not to, that she wasn't worth it. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she slipped her foot into the boot. It was still cold, but the repair was solid. The act of care was a strange, unfamiliar warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. For the first time, Tahu's eyes met hers directly. He gave a single sharp nod, no smile, just an acknowledgement that felt heavier than any promise. Just then, another figure pushed through the crowd. Reverend Josiah, his gray beard crusted with ice, his face a road map of weariness. His gaze fell on the scene. Issa, the shamed girl. Chaza, the Apache elder. Tahu, the silent son, and the smug, watchful town. "Issa," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "Child, what is this?" She couldn't answer. She just clutched the sack of flour like a shield. The Reverend's worried eyes moved to Chaza. "Do you know what you're doing? Do you know what the town will say? What this will cost her?" "She already knows the cost of shame," Chaza replied, his voice even. "She cannot be crushed by what is already broken." Martha Kane let out another shrill laugh. "She'll drag us all down into her filth." "Enough, Martha," Josiah said, raising a hand. But his own expression was deeply troubled. He looked at Issa, and his eyes were filled with a terrible pity. "Child, if you tie your fate to them, you will be cast out for good. There will be no place for you here, none at all." The words hit her harder than the cold. Cast out forever, an outcast among outcasts. She thought of the welcoming silence of the snowstorm, the death she had almost chosen. She thought of Chaza letting her stand on her own. She thought of Tahu's quiet hands, mending what was broken. Her gaze was pulled back to Tahu. He stood there, snow melting on his warm skin, his eyes still fixed on her. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't demanding anything. He was just waiting for her. For the first time in a very long time, Issa felt the weight of a choice that was actually hers, her own, not a choice made for her by others, not a fate forced upon her. Her lips parted, her breath a silver cloud in the lantern light. "I don't know where I belong," she whispered. Reverend Josiah's shoulders slumped. "Then you must choose very, very carefully." The wind howled, rattling the shutters of the trading post. The silence in the small clearing stretched tight. The judgment of the town on one side, the silent offer of the Apache on the other. And in the middle, Issa, clutching a sack of flour, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Tahu one more time, and in his dark, steady eyes she saw something that wasn't desire, or pity, or even kindness. It was something far more dangerous. It was possibility. The storm seemed to chase them from the town, its wind filled with the lingering venom of the whispers. Snow stung Issa's cheeks, and she couldn't tell if the wetness was from the blizzard or her own tears. Chaza led the way, his steps sure and steady. Tahu walked beside her, a silent, powerful shadow. It felt like they were forming a shield around her, a feeling so foreign she immediately tried to fight it. Depending on anyone was a weakness she couldn't afford. The trail wound through a forest of dark pines, and soon a small cabin came into view. Smoke curled from its chimney, a fragile ribbon against the violent sky. Chaza pushed the door open, and a wave of warmth and the scent of burning pine washed over Issa. It was so sudden, so welcoming, it felt like a physical blow. She froze on the threshold. It had been years since she had entered a place that felt like a shelter rather than a cage. Chaza stood aside, waiting for her to make the choice to enter. She took a sharp breath and stepped over the threshold into the flickering gold and red of the firelight. The cabin was simple. A low table, a few neatly folded blankets, and a fire that had been tended with care. There was no luxury, but more importantly, there was nothing broken. The wholeness of the place was unsettling. It felt like a language she had forgotten how to speak. Chaza placed the flour and meat on the table and settled himself on the floor by the hearth, as calm and solid as a boulder. Tahu, without a word, gestured for Issa to take a blanket near the fire. Her knees bent before she could think to refuse. The heat soaked into her frozen limbs, a painful, wonderful thawing. She sagged against the blanket, every muscle in her body screaming for rest, but her mind was on high alert, waiting for the trap to spring. Tahu slid a wooden bowl toward her. It was filled with a steaming broth that smelled of venison and wild herbs. He didn't watch her. He just turned his gaze back to the flames. She stared at the bowl, her stomach twisting with a painful mix of hunger and suspicion. His silence was more unnerving than any threat. Finally, the raw need won out. She lifted the bowl and drank. The hot liquid scalded her tongue, but she didn't stop. She drank greedily, shamelessly, until the bowl was empty. She set it down, the familiar heat of shame rising in her cheeks. "You should have kept it," she mumbled, her voice hoarse. Tahu's eyes flickered to hers for a single intense moment. Then he gave a slight shake of his head. The gesture was clear. "You are alive. That is what matters." Her throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, but the words were tangled in the knot of her own unworthiness. She pulled the blanket tighter, curling into herself, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It always dropped. Hours passed. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the howl of the storm battering the roof. Issa watched the flames dance, her mind blessedly empty for the first time in what felt like forever. And then, without meaning to, she spoke. The words just slipped out, quiet and raw. They said I was no good. The sound of her own voice startled her. She clamped her mouth shut, but it was too late. The dam had cracked. They said I was spoiled, she whispered to the fire, her fingers digging into the rough wool of the blanket. That no man would ever touch me without being shamed by it. And they were right. Her voice broke. Don't you see? I'm nothing. There's nothing here worth saving. She buried her face in her hands, a terrible, dry sob shaking her whole body. She wanted to claw the words back out of the air. The silence that followed was suffocating. She waited for the mockery, the disgust, the confirmation of everything she believed about herself. Instead, it was Chaza who spoke, his voice a low rumble. A heavy snow breaks the branch, he said, his eyes on the fire. But the spring sun melts the snow, and the branch grows toward the sky again. You don't understand, she shot back, her voice thick with tears and fury. His ancient gaze met hers. I understand enough. Tahu hadn't moved a muscle, but she saw his knuckles go white where his hand rested on his knee. He looked at her then, his expression impossible to read. But he didn't turn away. He didn't recoil. He just stayed. He just sat there, in the firelight, and saw her, all of her. And in that simple act of staying, something inside her twisted painfully. She pulled the blanket over her head, a child hiding from the world. She willed sleep to come and take her, but even with her eyes closed, all she could see was Tahu's face, unwavering, as if he had all the time in the world to wait for her to see what he saw. Time blurred. The fire burned low, and the shadows grew long and menacing. Issa drifted in a restless, dream-filled sleep until a sudden sound jolted her awake. Thump, thump, thump. It was a fist, pounding on the cabin door. Tahu was on his feet in an instant, a silent, towering silhouette against the dying embers. Chaza's head lifted, his calm unshaken, but his eyes were sharp. The knock came again, harder this time. And with it, a voice, slithering through the cracks in the wood, sharp with malice. Bring her out, Chaza. It was Elias Turner. She don't belong with you people. You've got no right to keep her. Another voice joined his, high-pitched and cruel. Martha Kane. She's our shame, not yours. Hand her over before you bring a curse down on all of us. Issa's blood ran cold. They had followed her. The whispers of the town had grown legs and teeth, and now they were scratching at the door. The fire snapped, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Chaza rose slowly, his presence filling the small cabin, making it feel even smaller. Issa clutched the blanket to her chest, her breath coming in shallow, terrified pants. Thump, thump, thunder. Last chance! Elias snarled from outside. You give her back, or she'll never set foot in this territory again. We'll run her out for good. Decide now. Issa's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked from Chaza's stony face to Tahu's rigid back, and in the terrible silence inside the cabin, she realized the storm hadn't been the real threat. The real storm was right outside the door. The firelight flickered, casting Tahu's shadow huge and monstrous on the wall. A single thought, hot and bright, cut through her fear. If she stepped outside that door, they would break what was left of her. But if she stayed, what would happen then? The door shuddered under another blow. The choice was here, and it was waiting for her. The pounding on the door was like a drumbeat, calling the town to witness her final destruction. Snow hissed through the cracks, carrying the hateful voices inside. Issa scrambled back against the far wall, the blanket her only shield. This was it. The nightmare she could never outrun. Shame had found her, and it was going to tear the door down. Chaza moved first. His massive frame blocked the firelight as he walked toward the door, not with haste, but with the slow, deliberate weight of a glacier. Tahu moved with him, silent and coiled as a panther. His hand rested near the wooden latch, but his eyes were fixed on his father, waiting for a signal. She doesn't belong to you. Elias Turner's voice was a venomous screech. "She belongs to the judgment of her own kind. Let her out before we drag her out." "She's ruined!" Martha Kane shrieked. "She'll poison this land if you keep her. Give her back." Issa squeezed her eyes shut, pressing the blanket against her mouth to stifle a scream. Every word was a brand, searing the lie she'd been forced to carry for years, that she was worthless, that her body was a testament to her own filth. But then Chaza's hand closed over the latch. He lifted it. He opened the door. The storm roared into the cabin, a blast of wind and snow and fury. Framed in the doorway was a mob. Elias and Martha stood at the front, their faces twisted with self-righteous hatred, their eyes glowing in the lantern light. "You think you can just hide her?" Elias sneered, spitting on the ground. "She's our shame, our problem. Send her out." Chaza stood in the doorway, the wind whipping his long white hair, his bare chest steaming in the freezing air. His voice, when it came, was not loud, but it rolled like thunder over the howl of the storm. "She is not yours to shame." The words hung in the air, simple and absolute. Elias's jaw tightened. He gestured wildly at Issa, who was still huddled by the fire. "She's been touched, spoiled goods, cast aside, and you'd have your son marry that. You'd taint your own blood with her filth," he bellowed, playing to the crowd. A ripple of gasps went through the townsfolk. Issa's breath hitched. Tears of humiliation burned her eyes. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole, and that's when she saw it. Tahu moved. He stepped forward, filling the doorway beside his father. The storm raged around him, but he seemed not to notice. He didn't say a word. But when Elias raised his hand, pointing a trembling finger at Issa, Tahu's arm shot out like a striking snake. He didn't grab Elias's finger. He grabbed his wrist. There was no sound, no crack of bone, but the absolute authority in the grip silenced the entire mob. Elias's face went white. The smugness vanished, replaced by a raw animal fear. Tahu didn't squeeze. He didn't need to. He just held the man's wrist, his dark eyes burning with a silent, terrifying promise. Then, with a look of utter contempt, he let go. Elias stumbled back as if he'd been struck, Martha's face contorted in a mask of fury. "You see? Savages, that's all they are. And you, Issa, you hide with them. You have no place anywhere now. Not with them, not with us. You'll bring nothing but a curse." The words were a direct hit. Issa felt them lodge deep in her oldest wounds. Her chest heaved. The blanket fell from her hands. Every eye in the mob turned to her. Her knees buckled, but she grabbed the edge of the low table, forcing herself to stay upright. Her voice was thin, a tiny thread in the wind, but it was there. "I didn't ask to be here," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't ask for them to find me, but they did. They gave me warmth. They gave me food. They treated me with more dignity than any of you ever have." The fire behind her crackled loudly, as if in agreement. A few people in the back of the crowd shuffled their feet, looking away. Reverend Josiah pushed his way to the front, his face a canvas of sorrow. He held up a hand for silence. "Child," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "you must understand. If you choose this path, there is no coming back. The town will shut its doors to you, forever. This choice is final." His words, meant to be kind, felt like the final turn of a key in a lock. She was being told to choose her own cage. She looked at the hateful faces of the mob, at the smug, recovering face of Elias Turner. Then she looked at Tahu. He hadn't spoken a single word to her. Not one. But his silence was a language all its own. In his eyes, she saw the truth. He was not offering her a cage. He was offering her a place to stand. Her voice was stronger now. "I have already been cast out," she said, looking directly at the Reverend. "By every single one of you. What more can you possibly take from me?" The Reverend's shoulders slumped in defeat. The crowd grew restless, their certainty beginning to fray. Elias, rubbing his wrist, spat into the snow again. "Then stay with the savages," he screamed, "and rot with them. You'll find no charity here ever again." He turned and shoved his way back through the crowd, Martha scurrying after him. One by one, the others followed, melting back into the storm until only the howl of the wind remained. Chaza shut the door. The sudden silence was deafening. Issa swayed on her feet, dizzy with the aftermath of the confrontation. Chaza simply returned to his spot by the fire as if nothing had happened. But Tahu remained by the door. His hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides, his whole body rigid, radiating a barely contained fury. He had held back. For her. She turned to face him, her lips parting to say something. She didn't know what. He finally met her gaze. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, and in them she saw it. Not pity, not desire, just a question, a silent, waiting question. And in that moment, Issa understood. The trial wasn't over. The mob was just the first wave. The real test wasn't theirs to give. It was hers. Could she, after all this time, believe she was worthy of the dignity he was offering? Could she step out of the prison of her shame and stand with him? Her heart pounded. A gust of wind rattled the shutters, a mournful cry from the world she was about to leave behind forever. The storm outside wasn't over, and neither was her reckoning. The silence in the cabin stretched on, thick and heavy. The adrenaline from the confrontation drained away, leaving Issa trembling and hollow. She had done it. She had spoken back. She had stood her ground. It was a small, fragile victory, but it was hers, and the echo of it was still ringing inside her. Chaza calmly fed another log to the fire. The flames leaped up, chasing the shadows back into the corners. He didn't look at her, didn't speak. His silence wasn't an absence. It was a space for her to breathe, to think, to be. Tahu still stood by the door, a statue of contained force. The storm still raged outside, and he seemed to be listening to it, as if guarding against more than just a mob of angry townsfolk. Issa couldn't take her eyes off him. His silence was a puzzle she desperately needed to solve. "They'll never let me come back now," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Chaza's head lifted, the firelight catching in his white hair. "Their forgiveness is a cage," he said. "You have just found the key." The words sank into her, heavy and true. She had been living in that cage for years, begging for scraps of acceptance from the very people who had locked the door. To truly leave it behind was a terrifying thought. It was like stepping off a cliff in the dark with no idea if there was ground below. A savage gust of wind hit the cabin, so hard the whole structure groaned. A draft snaked through a crack, and the fire sputtered, plunging half the room into darkness. The storm wanted in. Issa shivered, but this time it wasn't from the cold. It was from the weight of the question in Tahu's eyes. She had to know. She turned to him. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Why don't you speak? Why won't you just tell me what you want from me?" He didn't answer right away. He just watched her from across the small room. Then he moved. He walked toward her, the firelight sliding over the hard planes of his body. He stopped right in front of her, his dark eyes searching hers. And then he did something that shattered her world. He knelt. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost reverent. This giant of a man, this warrior, who had faced down a mob without a flicker of fear, folded his massive frame and knelt on the rough floorboards before her. He looked up at her, and in his gaze there was no sign that her brokenness, her ruin, was anything to be feared. He held out his hand, palm up, an offering, not a demand. Issa's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every scar, every cruel word, every moment of her shame rose up like a tidal wave, threatening to drown her. "Don't touch me," she whispered, the words that had been her shield, her mantra, her prison. "I'm broken." The storm wailed outside, a chorus for her despair. But Tahu didn't move. His hand remained outstretched, his eyes held hers, and they spoke a language clearer than any words. I see you. I see your broken pieces, and I am not afraid. Tears burned her cheeks. All her life, touch had been about taking, a claim, a violation, proof of her worthlessness. But this was something else. This was a choice. Her choice. The power of it was more overwhelming than any cruelty she had ever endured. Her own hand trembled as she lifted it. It hovered over his, a hummingbird hesitating before a strange new flower. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, a steady, solid warmth. She could pull back. She could retreat into the familiar cold of her shame, or she could take his hand and find out what it felt like to be chosen, not in spite of her brokenness, but with it. All of it. She pressed her palm against his. The contact was like a lightning strike, a jolt of pure, unadulterated recognition. A sob tore from her throat, raw and unrestrained. I'm broken, she wept, the words no longer a defense but a confession. His fingers closed around hers, gently, firmly, as if he were holding something infinitely precious. He bowed his head over their joined hands, his breath warm against her skin. He did not take, he received. Behind them, Chaza rose to his full towering height. His deep voice filled the cabin. Then let it be so. As if summoned by his words, the cabin door swung open again. A gust of snow swirled in, and standing on the threshold was Reverend Josiah. His cloak was soaked, his face etched with a profound conflict. He had come back. His gaze fell on Issa, her face streaked with tears, her hand in Tahu's. He looked at the kneeling giant, and for a long moment the Reverend was utterly still. The weight of an entire world of rules and judgments hung in the air. Finally he stepped inside, his boots thudding on the floor. The town would have me condemn this, he said, his voice soft and heavy. My church would have me cast you out, but my God would not. He looked from Tahu to Issa. What I see here is not ruin. It is redemption. He raised a trembling hand, not in judgment, but in blessing. I will not stand with the town in this. They have chosen their path of stones and whispers. You have chosen a path of fire and silence. I bless this union. May the storm that brought you together be the only storm you face. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Issa looked down at Tahu, her vision blurred by tears. Her whisper was no longer a plea. It was a vow. Don't touch me, she said, her voice steady, unless I give you leave. And then it happened. Tahu spoke. His voice was a low, rough rumble, like stones moving deep within the earth. It was the first time she had ever heard it. Then I will wait, he said, his eyes locked on hers. Forever. The sob that escaped her was half laugh, half cry. Her heart, which she thought had been shattered into a million pieces, suddenly felt like it was stitching itself back together. It was hope. Raw, terrifying, beautiful hope. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. Their breath mingled, warm in the firelight. Outside, the storm screamed its fury, but inside, a quiet peace was spreading, melting the ice that had encased her soul for so long. The Reverend lowered his hand, a sad, knowing smile on his face. Chaza's eyes shone with a fierce, quiet pride. The fire roared back to life, painting the walls in brilliant gold. Issa closed her eyes. Then let it begin, she said. The storm outside had not vanished. The world that had hurt her was still there. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. She was no longer broken. She had been reforged. The fire hissed, and sparks danced up the chimney like prayers. But just as the first true moment of peace settled over them, a new sound cut through the howl of the wind. It came from the direction of the town. It was not the sound of a mob. It was the sound of a single, piercing scream. The scream ripped through the night, a raw sound of terror that made the hair on Issa's arms stand up. Tahu was on his feet in an instant, his hand still holding hers, his body tensed. Chaza's calm face hardened, his eyes turning toward the distant, flickering lights of the town. "Stay here," Chaza commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. He grabbed a heavy cloak and was out the door before Issa could even form a question. Tahu pulled her closer to the fire, his grip on her hand a reassuring anchor in a suddenly chaotic world. He stood between her and the door, a living shield, his gaze fixed on the darkness where his father had disappeared. The silence in the cabin was now filled with a new, sharper tension. What was happening back there? Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the frantic beating of Issa's own heart. She had just found a sanctuary, a moment of peace, and now the world was clawing at the edges of it again. Finally, the door opened. It was Chaza. Snow clung to his cloak, and his face was grim. "It is Turner," he said, his voice flat. "He has gone mad. After the town turned on him, he went back to the trading post. He blames Martha for his downfall. He has barred the door. He says he will burn it to the ground with her inside it." Issa's blood ran cold. Elias Turner, the man who had broken her, the source of all her shame, was now about to commit murder. And the town that had protected him, that had enabled his cruelty for years, was now his victim. What are they doing?" she whispered. "They are standing outside," Chaza said with a hint of contempt, wringing their hands. "The Reverend tries to reason with him, but Turner is lost to his rage. They are cowards. They fed the wolf for years, and now they are surprised it has turned to bite." Tahu let out a low growl, the first sound he'd made since his vow to her. He looked at his father, a question in his eyes. Chaza shook his head. "This is not our fight. This is their poison. They must find their own cure." But Issa looked at Tahu, and she saw the conflict in him. He was a protector. To stand by and do nothing while a woman was in danger, even a woman as cruel as Martha Kane, went against his very nature. And she understood it. She thought of all the times someone could have stepped in for her. All the times a blind eye had been turned. All the times silence had been the same as a blow. She could not, would not, be one of them. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. Tahu and Chaza both turned to look at her. "You're wrong. It is our fight. He hurt me. He built his power in that town on the shame he forced on me. His violence didn't start tonight. It started with me. It has to end with me." A slow, profound respect dawned in Chaza's ancient eyes. He looked at his son, and Tahu gave a single, sharp nod. The decision was made. They moved as one, back out into the teeth of the storm. The wind was dying down, but the air was still frigid. As they neared the town, they could see it, a ring of dark figures, standing helpless around the trading post. An orange glow flickered from within, and the smell of smoke was sharp in the air. "He's done it! He's lit the fire!" someone shouted. Reverend Josiah stood at the front, his hands outstretched. "Elias! In the name of God, man, open the door! Do not add murder to your list of sins!" A crazed laugh answered him from inside. "She made me do this, all of them. They whispered and judged. She is the source of the rot." Martha Kane's terrified screams could be heard from inside. The townsfolk just watched, paralyzed by the fear they themselves had cultivated. Tahu did not hesitate. He strode forward, parting the crowd like a ship through water. He didn't try the barred door. He went to the side of the building, braced his feet, and slammed his shoulder into the log wall. The wood groaned. He hit it again. A crack appeared. A third time, and the log splintered, a section of the wall bursting inward. Smoke and screams poured out. Without a moment's hesitation, Tahu plunged into the burning building. Issa's heart stopped. She ran forward, Chaza right behind her. A moment later, Tahu emerged from the smoke, carrying a sputtering, coughing Martha Kane. He set her down in the snow, her fine furs singed, her face black with soot. She looked up at her rescuer, her rat-like eyes wide with disbelief. Then Elias Turner stumbled out of the hole in the wall, a burning torch in one hand and a wild, cornered look in his eyes. He saw Isa, his face, already contorted with rage, twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "This is all your fault, you witch! You ruined me!" He lunged at her, the burning torch held high like a weapon. Isa screamed and stumbled back, but she wasn't alone. Tahu moved so fast he was a blur. He stepped between them, taking the blow from the torch on his bare forearm. The flesh sizzled. Tahu didn't even flinch. He grabbed Turner's wrist, the same one he had grabbed before, and this time he did not let go. With a single fluid motion he twisted, and Turner cried out, the torch falling into the snow with a hiss. The fight was over. The spell was broken. The men of the town surged forward, finally spurred to action, and dragged the weeping, broken Elias Turner away. The fire was quickly put out. The trading post was damaged, but not destroyed. In the eerie silence that followed, the entire town stood there, in the snow, looking at Isa. And at Tahu, who stood beside her, a fresh burn mark on his arm. No one whispered. No one sneered. In their eyes, Isa saw something new, awe, and a deep, collective shame. Reverend Josiah stepped forward. He didn't look at Isa. He looked at the faces of his flock. "We have harbored a great sin in our midst," he said, his voice ringing with newfound conviction. "We were cowards. We allowed the lies of a cruel man to poison our hearts and to break an innocent child. We failed her, and we failed God. Our judgment was blind. Tonight, we have seen true character, true courage, and it was not among us." He turned to Isa and Tahu. He bowed his head. "There is no apology deep enough for what this town has done, but we ask for your forgiveness, and we ask that you would consider making your home here, to lead us, to show us a better way." Isa looked at the faces of the people who had scorned her. She looked at the smoldering trading post, a monument to the town's ugly secret. She looked at Chaza, whose face held a quiet approval. And then she looked at Tahu. He looked down at her, his dark eyes asking the only question that mattered. "What do you want?" She had spent her whole life being defined by this town, by their whispers, by their judgment. To stay would be the ultimate victory. To become their leader, their conscience. It was a power she had never dreamed of. But as she looked into Tahu's eyes, she realized she didn't need their town. She didn't need their validation. She didn't need their forgiveness. She reached up and gently touched the burn on his arm. He had taken the fire for her. All this time, she thought she was the one who was broken. But the truth was, the whole town was broken, and she was finally whole. She smiled, a real, true smile. "Our home is not here," she said, her voice clear and strong for all to hear. "Our home is with our family." She took Tahu's hand. Together, with Chaza walking beside them, they turned their backs on the town and walked away, leaving the stunned and shamed townsfolk standing in the snow. They walked back toward the small cabin, toward the quiet strength of the forest. The storm had passed. The sky was clear, and the stars were blazing with a cold, clean light. Isa had walked into the blizzard to die, a broken girl running from her past. She was walking out of it with a future she could never have imagined, her hand held securely by a man who had waited forever just to hear her voice. She wasn't running anymore. She was walking home. The story of Isa and Tahu shows that sometimes the greatest strength isn't found in fitting in, but in having the courage to walk away and build a new world of your own. If you were inspired by their journey from ruin to redemption, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story we have in store.